Hey, it's Mazzy. This is a Mazzy mix video. I haven't done one of these in a while, and these are basically my presentations of new records that have come in the house, new releases for the most part, reissues, archival reissues. Even though a lot of records have been coming in the house constantly since I've done one of these, this is one, and I say this is a special one because there's some pretty cool ass records here. And I want to start out with two records, one of which I've heard before and one I haven't heard. And I've talked about the Seattle archival reissue label, Light in the Attic, and they just released, literally coming out as we speak, two amazing records by Morphine. First of all, they're a trio, and they're really an interesting trio because they're made up of bass, drums, and saxophone. So no guitar player, although on some of the later albums, there is guitar and some supplemental musicians that have come on, especially on the last album, The Night. But Matt Sandman has this really interesting, not quite a baritone, but a low register voice. And his singing is so cool, and it's so deep, and it's so dramatic. I would say they're a mix of rock, post-punk, funk, soul, and jazz. They have a lot of jazz influence, and the saxophone really pushes that. A little on the jazz on the outside. I was trying to picture in my mind and think, sort of this sense memory of what band I was thinking of. What band were they reminded me of a little bit? Not with the vocals, but the musical breaks, the musicianship. And there's a little bit of the San Francisco band Romeo Void. Now, of course, not with Deborah Ayal, the singer, but Benjamin Bossi was a sax player in that band and had that very, almost like a baritone type sax sound, just really in your face. And that's exactly what Morphine has. Now, this is their, as I said, their major label debut. I think it got good reviews, but it didn't break out like the label thought it would. But I love this record, especially in this indie time into the 90s. A lot of bands, when they hit major labels, some of their fans would consider them selling out. Look at Nirvana, of course. Morphine's original CDs were on Roicodisc, and Roicodisc had a little bit of a cred for a while. They were licensing David Bowie's catalog, and they were licensing Elvis Costello's catalog, and they had some really cool original records as well. But Nights Swimming is a single 33 and a third album. Mine's on blue vinyl. I think there are several color variants. They also all have a obi on the outside. You can tell before you buy what this music is about, sort of description. I love that about Light in the Attic. And what I wanted to say is I really like this sweet spot reissues. We're always kind of, wanting these major audio file or reissue labels to put the same old crap out over and over again. And these are records that haven't been released on vinyl before. This is the stuff that needs to come out on vinyl. These are the type of artists that, through the 90s that really need to be reissued. And I hope the labels really start, pursuing this. Now, this also has a lovely book, beautifully annotated, well written. I've skimmed through it while I was listening to this record. I have heard these records just once through. But the biggest surprise for me musically was Morphine's The Night. This is, again, the posthumous album. I'd never heard this album, and I don't even know if I remember it coming out. Obviously, since this was on a CD, this is expanded to 2 LPs. And in this case, we got an orange colored label, double 45 RPM. These sound amazing. Now, these say they're mastered from original master tapes, and you know how that goes. I don't know if that means all analog or digital step, but I tell you, for me, it didn't matter. These sound amazing. These are really good sounding and well-pressed records. They have sort of the old style, almost like 70s insets. Yes, they're paper sleeves, don't freak out, but they have promotions of the label, but they sound really, really good. There is one song on here, I was trying to think who this reminds me of, but a song on here, Rope on Fire, and I realized Rope on Fire sound a little like later period Talking Heads or David Byrne. There's a lot of cool percussion on here, and there's some acoustic guitars and other guest artists brought in here. And I kept thinking of Tom Waits. This reminded me of later Tom Waits, not vocals at all. Doesn't have that deep throaty thing that some people can't stand on a Tom Waits record. I happen to love Tom Waits records, the later period especially. But these have the same kind of instrumentation, percussive, other instruments. There's some sort of Middle Eastern sounds on here, some cello playing. Just a beautiful record. I was bowled over how good this record is. So I would suggest check either of these out. For me, this hit the sweet spot. The other one is an amazing record, but this is the one that surprised me. And unfortunately, it came out after he passed away. But I highly recommend Morphine the Night. These new Light in the Attic reissues are fantastic. Let me just give you a little background. This is their first album. This was released, reissued in 2020 on the Run Out Groove. That was the label that people vote, and they narrow it down to 3 records, 3 albums, and they release it, and you get your sort of, you buy in a way. Great way and great reissues here. I think the 2 of the other records I've shown before on my channel about Run Out Groove are the Secret Machines records. Again, 2 great records by that artist that never came out on vinyl prior to that. These are the sweet spots. Get into the 90s and 2000s, more of this kind of stuff, please. This has some alternate versions and singles. This one, the one that I got into initially on a compact disc back in the 90s, early 90s, was their second album, Cure for Pain. I think this is the one that a lot of people started hearing on college radio stations. And I went to see them several years later, and it turned into this live album that Run Out Groove put out. This is Morphine live at the Warfield in 1997. I was at this show at the Warfield Theater on Market Street in San Francisco, and this came out several years ago, 2017. This was Royco disc. I don't remember this coming out on CD. It's possible it did. I don't remember. Don't remember that heritage and that provenance of that. But, you know, great band. Just a great power trio. There's some amazing nuances. Sometimes they get into these out there jazzy saxophone jams, maybe a little like the Lounge Lizards, the 80s Lower East Side thing with the Lurie Brothers. They're more jazz, straight ahead, modernist jazz. But this is more rock. There's a throbbing bass and percussive sound to this. And I think he might use some kind of fretless bass. It sounds like, I'm not quite sure, but it's cool ass music. It makes you want to move. It's a little wild, but very accessible. I'm so pumped that Light in the Attic put these records out on vinyl finally. Just wonderful records. Again, like Swimming and The Night, Morphine, Light in the Attic records. As much as I like vinyl, and I do love vinyl, as you know, sometimes a multi-disc CD set can really capture the essence and the expanse of an artist's career. David Sylvian. David Sylvian's Somata Sound. What a beautiful, gorgeous design box. He always has sort of these Japanese influence design. David Sylvian, I've spoken about him on my channel several times. In fact, there's a feature on David Sylvian. Came out of the band with his brother, Japan, 1978. Their first album came out in the UK. I saw them on my first trip in a funky kind of club bar called Dingwalls in London. Followed them, they kind of had a glammy sound, and they really got into really a more cerebral rock band sound. And of course, David Sylvian went on to a solo career and had a series of amazing albums on Virgin Records, just gorgeous records. I'm a big fan of that period. When his contract ended, when he pulled out, he had some issues with Virgin, little tug of war there. He went on and started his own label and started doing more electronic music, experimental music, electronic collaborations. And in a way, that makes sense to have a box of his work on compact discs. It's all sort of computer-based, electronic-based, guitar sounds, amplifier, reverbed, drenched, effects, pedals, just really good ethereal thing. I've called out many times the album Blemish. That was his first solo album when he went on his own, and that's a part of this box. That's what opens this box. This covers his work from 2003 to 2014, and it is a stunner. I just ordered this from the UK. I assume you could order it here. Obviously, the obligatory book, which is nothing short than amazing. This is a collection of 8 compact discs, come in these separate sleeves that contain 2 to 4 CDs per folio. As I said, this contains Blemish, his first solo album in the new career on his new label. It has The Only Daughter, the remixes, 9 Horses. That's an album I would love to see a vinyl issue of. His brother plays on that, and that is a dark album and a gorgeous album. His music is very dark, and it's very like disjointed and just really cerebral. His voice is a low baritone that sometimes is edited and as if it skips sometimes. It sometimes just flows, and it's a very soothing late night morning type of sound. Once in a while, an abrasive instrument or electronic sound will kind of jar you awake if you're sleeping. David Sylvian collaboration, another 9 Horses single and EPs with Ryuichi Sakamoto is on here. Just an amazing array of some amazing collaborations he's done with so many experimental and other artists. One of my favorites too is Morphine. This did come out last year on vinyl as well, very experimental, but just a wonderful set, a wonderful collection. If you like something more experimental, if you like something a little angular, very angular, but just a deep dive in the world of David Sylvian. Now his records on Virgin are probably more accessible, more traditionally song-based, but beautiful nonetheless, just great records, as are the Japan albums, especially Polaroids, Tin Drum, just love those records. So David Sylvian, this great box set of his later solo work from 2003, 2014, Somata Sound. Lastly, I want to share something I got for my birthday, a real surprise from someone in the vinyl community, another channel, someone who I've traded and exchanged music with over the last 4 years or so. And that was a surprise birthday gift that arrived from Melinda Murphy. You know her, I'll put a link to her channel below, but if you don't know her, I have really enjoyed watching her journey into record buying, into vinyl. She's obviously a newer collector than I am. I go back 50, almost 60 years now, and she's gone back just in the last, I think, 5 to 8 years, maybe even less. So following her journey has been a real pleasure, an enjoyment, entertainment, watching what she's into. Her only fault, I think, is that her #1 band is Van Halen over the Beatles, but it's a different generation thing, so I'll give her that. But she sent me out of the blue, she reached out to me and said there's a package on the way, and she basically told me what it was, but I was so bowled over because It's something I wouldn't have bought. And I love the record. And this is the UHQR, Steely Dan, Can't Buy a Thrill. She heard me on one of my videos, I think, mention that Steely Dan's Can't Buy a Thrill is my favorite Steely Dan album. It's the first album I got in 1972 of Steely Dan's. I think this is their best record. Now, of course, they moved into sort of a little bit of a jazz. Now, some people are saying they're a yacht rock album. Steely Dan are not yacht rock, all right? Mazzy says they're not yacht rock. They're not Jimmy Buffett or Loggins and Messina or Little River Band or Supertramp. They're probably not yacht rock either, but you know what I'm talking about. But they have a jazzy side, they has an easy side sometimes, but they're great musicians and great songs. And what I like about this record is the mix of vocalists. It's not just Donald Fagen, but obviously the primary writer. I remember first hearing Reelin' in the Years and Do It Again, and I just went and bought the record just because of those two tracks. And I still have my original ABC label. Actually, it's the second press when they started changing the label to the blocks after the square. It's the stacked ABC blocks, and it sounds so good. It's cleaned up well, and I played that, and it's such a great rock and roll record, and just great songwriting, great musicianship, and it sounded really good, and it's different than the original. Would I say it's better? For my taste, it's not better, but it's really, really good. It's a successful version of Can't Buy a Thrill. I think it softens the record a little bit, but luckily it doesn't like cut off the highs like they did with Pretzel Logic. It sounds really good. It's audiophile. It's close as this record would be an audiophile. But I think the original has more guts. It has more, if they have soul, it has more soul and punch to it. Is that a good thing? Maybe because I'm used to it for 50 years, 51 years, that could be that. But I would say if you have an original and you really like your original and it's a clean sounding original, you don't need this. If you don't have a good sounding record, this is really good. So I do recommend it. You know me, again, the price point, the boxes, that's for you to decide. But it is a successful accomplishment for acoustic sounds and analog productions. Good job on this one. It just is more different than being better from my point of view. But again, thank you, Melinda. Very generous of you to send this to me. And had a great birthday, so I really appreciate that. So that's Mazzy's mix, the first one I've done in a long time. Some great new records to check out. Thanks to everyone for watching. Check out those Morphine records. Mazzy loves you.